This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, and welcome to episode 135 of the Chills of Will podcast. It's a pleasure today to be joined by Briana Muñoz. And a little bit about her. She is a writer from Southern California. Raised in San Diego, she spent a lot of her time at her mother's Mexican folklore dance classes and at ranches where her father trained horses into the sunset. She is the author of Loose Lips, a poetry collection published by Prickly Pear Publishing in 2019. Her work has been published in the Bravura Literary Journal, La BLOGA, the oldest Chicano literature blog in history, the Poets Responding page, and in the Oakland Arts Review, among others. In the 2016 publication of the Bravura, she was awarded the second place fiction prize. Her poem Rebirth was featured in the reproductive health edition of the Saint Sucia zine. Briana's work was one of 10 chosen for the Best of LA BLOGA from 2015. When she isn't typing away, she enjoys danza azteca, live music, cats, and thrift shopping. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for that introduction. You read through it very smoothly.
I appreciate that. So is that saying that La BLOGA is the oldest Chicano literature blog in history?
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, and it was actually through them that I first started submitting poetry anywhere. So
Okay.
yeah, I've kept it in my bio, even though it's 2015.
Very cool. Honored to have you on, and I know that doesn't completely cover everything about you, but we'll get into some of the backgrounds. I'd love to know about growing up, in San Diego, like your relationship with literature, reading, writing. I mean, were you a monolingual English speaker who understood Spanish? Did you grow up bilingual? Like, how does language and literature and reading kind of come into play?
Yeah, so actually, well, I guess we should start off with, I'm Mexican American, grew up in San Diego, which is, considered a border town. And my mother was born in Mexico, migrated to the US when she was a teenager with her family. And then my dad, he was born here in the US, but he's very, very just involved in Mexican culture in the forms of charreria, which is like Mexican rodeo. And he also did some performing that was very Mexican, it's Mexican culture too. So that was, my first language was Spanish. But, growing up in the US and being introduced to the educational system here, that was quickly, I do feel a little subconscious when I speak Spanish now because it's, not very strong. So through writing, it's important for me to translate my poetry into Spanish because, one, honoring that side of me, but also I just had this really awesome experience where I gifted a copy of my book, Everything is Returned to the Soil, which is a bilingual collection, right, to my grandparents. And my grandma, who only speaks Spanish, was able to, read my dedication, which listed them. So, yeah, it's just like full circle. But yeah, as far as growing up, yeah, so Spanish speaking was in my household, but not too much after us going to school. So, yeah.
I got to figure that's as good as it gets to have grandma read your work in Spanish with it, like you said, with the dedication to her. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Shoot, even your biography is poetic. The line about your father, where her father trained horses into the sunset. That's cool. That's cool. Are we talking like jaripeo, like horses doing the cool little chop and dancing, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, so my dad, he literally from the time he could walk, he hopped on a horse and has been riding since then. But he, as his profession, he trained horses. He was a personal horse trainer.
Oh, wow.
So my summers were spent like being dragged to the ranches where he would train. And, you know, at the time it was like, I wish I was at the beach or with friends. But now, you know, always looking back, it's like, no, that was pretty cool. I was out in nature and surrounded by animals. So.
What were you reading? Whether it was like something that you were, you know, assigned in school, or your parents showed interest in, or you know, gave to you, or whatever, or you're just not totally on your own. Who were you reading? What were you reading? You know, as a kid into adolescence.
So I always like to honor, you know, like as a Chicana poet and writer, Sandra Cisneros, which is like a very obvious one, but you know, it's because of women like her that like you know, this podcast is being recorded. Like,
Sure.
And I take that into account in my own work too. On Thursday, I read to a class of high school students that were in like a fellowship summer program, and like, you know, to be inspiring students, and you know, it's also like a class of mainly like Latin, Hispanic students. It's, you know, it's like important work. So Sandra Cisneros was a very obvious influence, but also around like maybe 7th grade, I had a field trip to the Cal State San Marcos, and Michele Serros was reading there. Yeah, so that was also like you know, that was like real life poetry in front of me. Also somebody that identifies as like Latinx, and like, you know, she has passed now, but like I always have that memory of you know, just introduction to Latin poets at an early age.
Well, I mean, the way that people, she's like your favorite poet's favorite poet. I mean, I've heard people just talk about her as just a total legend. I said she passed away, I think it's what, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah. Oh man, but you got to see her live. Was she like a fiery type of poet, or is she more like chill, laid back?
Well, you know, that was a while ago, but I have like watched poetry recordings of her just like recently, and yeah, I don't know. It's funny, like when you see like your own work and you're like, yeah, those were definitely my influences, because you like almost hear them in your own poetry. But a cool thing is I actually have a signed book from that, you know, that like pivotal moment in my writing career.
Cool.
And I almost like forgot about that experience, and I like found the book at my parents' house and was like, whoa, yeah.
Oh man, that's so cool. A little Wikipedia search tells me that I don't know, do you know Rage Against the Machine?
Yes.
They, you know, in the days of like having like covers and like an actual CD, you know, they'd always have like selected readings, or like assigned, or like you know, recommended readings. Read some, you know, Frantz Fanon, read some you know, Chomsky. And they actually had some of Michele Serros, some of her work on, I guess, the Evil Empire one. That's cool. I did not know that. Yeah. As you got into high school, college, you know, out of college, like young adult, like, did you continue? Who else did you see live, or who else did you get into, whether they were poets or not? Who else were you reading? I guess into who else are you reading as we speak these days?
Well, you know, like in college, it was like T.S. Eliot, and or, you know, like I say this a lot, and like a slogan that I go off of is like decolonize your bookshelves, because in school, like it's always, and I have a poem that like says, you know, all of the white male poets taught to me in grade school so I was reading like all of the classic, poetry literature, Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman and all of that. Um, but now, like everything that's on my bookshelf, living as a poet in the poetry world, you like all of my friends are poets, so it's like whenever they're coming out with new books, you have to support them,
right,
and want to support them, obviously, but
right.
so it's a lot of living, poets of color. They all live on my bookshelf now.
Oh, very cool. Are you able to read like truly read for pleasure, or are you always like when you read poetry, are you kind of like, oh, that's an interesting, line break, or that's an interesting pantoum, or you know what I mean? Like, are you kind of like not critiquing in a negative way, but are you just like reading like a coach or a teacher? You know what I mean?
I do sometimes, but with books like that, or with poetry like that, I usually like just will flip open a page, and I like will know immediately if I wouldn't really vibe with it. So I probably wouldn't purchase.
Right.
Also, like usually a lot of the stuff that I am reading, it's like been on recommendation basis. So or it's like I keep hearing this name, so I should probably look into them, or
Yeah.
so I'll give like those a good read through.
Yeah.
But my reactions are usually like, oh my God, that's clever, like
Huh.
that's and I'll
Yeah.
about a laugh or something, because I'm like, how? Or like,
Right.
I wish I'd written that. Yeah.
Without like starting like a beef in your like local, poet community. So you don't have to name anybody like well or something like that. Who's somebody like outside of your group that's like really wowing you, like a contemporary poet?
Well, so I'll just name like one book that I really enjoyed, and he is a pressmate of mine, but Caesar de Leon, he's out of Texas.
Okay.
He has a really strong collection. It just won an award or was nominated, but he is like a queer Latinx poet, and so there's like, I don't know, I guess when like when you really enjoyed someone's work is when you remember the poems in the collection.
Yes.
If you were like, those are, you might not really recall like specifics.
Mm-hmm.
So he has like a really awesome poem about attending like a barbecue as a gay man. And it's like a list poem of things not to do or to avoid doing, or things to do. So it's like, things like, and this probably isn't in it, but it's like burp real loud, or like, just drink a craft beer, bring craft beer only. It's like, so it's, but he also has some really like heavy poem to his mom. Yeah, that's just the first book that comes up in mind.
Cool. Thanks for that rec. In the collection, we're gonna mainly talk about with everything returns to the soil, en español todo vuelve a la tierra. Like music comes up a lot, and I guess maybe before I even ask you about that, like the idea of like the poet as speaker, like you can plead the fifth, or you can like do you feel like you're the speaker in your poems is 100% you, or like not at all, or like an amalgamation of you and what you want to be, you know what I mean? Like I don't know how much the poet as speaker works for you.
In that book, I would say like 95%, yeah. And then obviously like some things are you add a little bit of like sprinkle a little drama or
Sure.
over exaggeration, but yeah, I mean, I also write like short stories that are fiction, and that would be a different answer. But with poetry, it's usually like you can tell what I've been going through through, you know, like that year was very much about like reclaiming my indigeneity and reclaiming like my you know, existing as a woman of color, and learning to like not carry shame about certain things about existing as a woman. And you can kind of all see that in that book.
So, you know, I mean, a really cool and eclectic music collection. I mean, you don't talk about a lot of music, but a good amount, you know, like, I'm like, okay, cool. I went and checked out that Neil Young song you referenced, Harvest Moon, I want to say.
Right.
Which was cool. Again, I hadn't known that song, but it gave me good memories. My dad and my brother, good, you know, Heart of Gold, the Neil Young song, right? I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds like I said, like an eclectic sense of music. How does music, maybe it doesn't, how does music work into your writing? Like, whether that's like what you're listening to while you write, or like how the music that you like bleeds into what you write?
Yeah. That's interesting. I like haven't even like made that observation from my collection. I guess it just like seeps in. But you know, like talking about my parents are performers. My mom is a dancer, and she's been dancing since before I was born, and she's still a dance teacher and performer. And then my dad, I was saying he performs. He does, it's called Floreo de Soga, and in English would be trick and fancy roping. Trick and fancy roping. So it's like the lasso, and he's jumping through it. And with that, he toured with like the most famous mariachi groups in the world, and with Linda Ronstadt, who's actually that. She does the backup vocals for Heart of Gold. You just mentioned that, but anyway.
Oh, seriously?
So yeah.
Oh,
if you listen back to it, you'll hear it. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Thank you. That's cool to hear. Okay.
But yeah, so it was music's always been like a very big part of my life, and yeah, so I guess it just kind of seeps in. I do listen to music as I'm writing sometimes for just like to set the mood. It's usually very like acoustic, dark, emotional type music. Yeah.
I wonder then, like, how dance and indigeneity works into your writing as well. I mean, that's probably a long answer, and maybe you don't even fully know, like it's somewhere subconscious, but like, how does it work? Are you like someone, do you dance, like, do you travel the country? Is it something that's, you know, a daily thing for you? How does the dance, you know, it's obviously a form of creativity too. How does that work in with your writing?
Yeah. So to be a Mexica indigenous dancer, it's like really to live a whole lifestyle. People see, you know, us in ceremony, or see us at Placita Olvera and think it's like a performance, but it's really like a spiritual practice and ritual. And you know, you're honoring and asking permission from you know, the four elements and the directions. And yeah, so I think it's just so much part of me that it inevitably like ends up being my focus of writing right now. But yeah, I think also it kind of overlaps with like the work that I do with like social justice, because I'm very inspired by, you know, like living in an environmentally friendly and conscious like lifestyle as well. I mean, of course, I live in LA and I have a car, and you know, I sometimes order a Starbucks coffee, and that's like wasteful, right? But you know, I'm aware of it, and that ends up in my poetry as well. And, you know, of course, indigeneity overlaps with that because it's very focused on living with the land.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about like it's a lifestyle. I mean, I guess I can't imagine that you would just go and dance once in a while and just kind of like, okay, cool, I'm done until next time. Like you said, it's yeah. Do you learn Nawal? Like, do you learn some basic phrases even? Like,
yeah. So through events, I have learned a little like the animal names and the directions. Of course, so I practice dance twice a week with my circle. Then you know, like every other weekend, it's like a ceremony or a powwow or you know, like a retreat, spiritual retreat, or a sweat lodge, or whatever it is. So it's, you know, very much part of every day. But yeah, I'm also you call it a fire keeper. So there's different roles within Danza Azteca, and so to be a fire keeper, you're you know, burning copal, which is an incense from tree resin, and you're cleansing the circle, you're cleansing all of the instruments and smudging the danzantes before they enter the circle. And because of that as well, like I have to acknowledge the four directions in Nahuatl, and so I've learned a little here and there.
oh wow, very interesting. Thank you for that. So you know, as you got into writing, like Loose Lips was your first collection. That was 2017.
2019.
2019. Loose Lips was okay. Excuse me. Yeah. You know, did you like in writing that? Like, was it a lot of like life experience? Like you went out and you know doing different jobs and stuff like that, and just living in the world, or was it something that you'd started a while back, like in more of like a not sterile, but more of like a classroom environment? Like, you know, what was like a lot of the main fodder for Loose Lips?
So so I guess I'll start off with when I've been performing poetry for maybe 6 years now. And so I went to a poetry festival in Havana, Cuba.
Oh yeah.
And it was like really that trip when I was, you know, reading poetry, and people would come up to me after and they'd be like, hey, like, where can I find your book? And I was like, well, I don't have one. So that was like big, like, motivation for me coming back from that trip. I was like, okay, like, it's about time. I've been writing for, you know, however many years now. And I was really motivated coming back from that to start my book publishing journey. At that point, I had submitted and been published in a lot of like literary journals, but I was like, let's focus on putting together a book now. So
how did you, I mean, backing up a little bit, was there a so like going back a couple years, like what I mean, did you have a teacher or a friend or just yourself where you're like, man, I can do this, like what I'm writing here, people, this makes sense, these are cool images, you know, people identify with it, people respond, like how did that work?
Well, so I've been writing since I was like 10 years old, writing poetry. And yeah, I mean, I would like to think that every published poet or successful poet or has had like mentors or just one teacher be like, hey, this is like, have you ever considered publishing? Or but yeah, I mean, I had so many blessings along the way. When I just remember being like in 7th grade and be like, I'm gonna be an author. And but yeah, it wasn't until high school when one of my English teachers, she helped me. She like asked me to bring my poetry and helped me like pick out certain poems to submit to like the youth, some like youth anthology. And then, but in college, I had some really amazing experiences with two teachers there at the community college that I went to. They were creative writing teachers, and they were very just like motivating and encouraging me to read and perform. And around that same time, I had met Sonia Gutierrez, which is she's a who's also published by poet and writer, published by Flower Song Press. And I remember sitting down with her, and she was the first person that like really pushed me to submit. And it was after like our little meeting at a coffee shop where I like went back home and I wrote something out and I sent it off to be published. And it was accepted. And that's really how like everything I would think started. She's also the first person that invited me to read at a poetry festival as part of her panel. And so yeah, a big shout out to her. And you know, we're doing readings. Like I was just at a Barnes and Noble doing a reading with her like 2 weeks ago. So
cool. With you're talking about like the reading of it at the I guess conference or festival in Cuba and stuff. Do you was there like a big stage fright, or was it like, let's do this?
Yeah, no, that was I had done some, you know, performances by that point, but no, I've literally never, I'm just not like a nervous person when it comes to performing. I've been performing my entire life with dance, so I'm not, I like to credit that. I think I'm just like, yeah, let's hop up there and I can exist like vulnerably and yeah, I think poetry is to be shared with the world.
Definitely. How about like quote unquote decoding your poetry? Like, how do you feel, you know, about people kind of like, you know, breaking it down, like, oh, what, you know, or asking you like, what did you mean by this line, you know, or like trying to get like an answer like objectively? Is that something that you're like into, like, oh yeah, this symbol I meant to be this such and such, or is it more kind of like free flowing where it's like, you know, whatever it means to you?
Well, I guess maybe a little bit of both. I don't know. I'm honestly, when I like have those conversations, I'm like flattered. I'm like, wow, you read my poem. Or even just when people pull out, you know, like certain poems that from my book or my performance that they connected with. That's always just really cool. And it's interesting how, you know, like a poem that I maybe don't ever read in public is in my book, and maybe someone will be like, yeah, I really liked this one. And it's interesting to hear like how different people connect with certain poems in that collection.
Yeah, definitely. So the most recent collection is Everything Returns to the Soil / Todo Vuelve a la Tierra. I wonder like maybe some seeds for the book. Seeds for the book. I didn't even mean that pun there, but the soil. Okay, sorry. Like some of the background on like, you know, kind of where the title came from and just the collection.
Yeah. So as mentioned, like when I was writing that collection, I was also just going through a lot of you know, like reclaiming of my indigeneity. It's around the time when I was really first introduced to danza azteca are really getting more involved in it, and so a lot of like poetry inspired by like ancestral connection or ancestral messages, existing with the land, but then also like just, you know, I'm also a woman that's like in around that time, like mid-20s, and lots of like, so in one of the blurbs by Odelia, she in the back of the book, she's an amazing poet and inspiration as well. But Odelia Galvan Rodriguez, she, in her blurb, she says something about like Brianna's not afraid to combine the sin with the sacred. So I feel like that's a pretty great representation. There's like, you know, the poem about the bar, but then there's also the poem about like messages from the earth. And so yeah, it's I guess that's also kind of speaks on where the title comes from. Everything is returned to the soil. And so, yeah.
Yeah, the epigraph is, quote, "As I began identifying the themes of my poetry, I noticed one thing. I noticed that everything stems from Mother Earth and everything returns to her. Love, spirituality, medicine work, politics, cultura, traditional practices, the delicious food prepared by my abuela." You know, and like you said there, you know, you write here about how 2019 was a year of a spiritual awakening, personal growth. And so that makes a lot of sense with the title. It ends with "Everything is returned to the soil. Todo vuelve a la sierra, sacred soil. Thank you." One of your poems, the lines are, quote, "How many poems can I puke out to audiences of people I do not know, who will return to their homes and I to my despair? How many poems can I write?" So the idea of like, can poems be like a catharsis? Is it like, oh, you know, through writing them, you feel like a relief or you get answers? Or is it kind of like, I'm putting it out into the world and so be it?
I don't know. Poetry is such a like living, like a living thing. Like it can be the relief and expression and emotion, and then it can also be like torment while you're trying to go to bed at like 3 a.m. because something just comes into your brain.
Sure.
And you have to release it. So yeah, it's really all of it. Yes. I would say.
Yeah. With you know, Mother Earth and sacred soil being such a big theme